is David Finkel. On behalf of the Board of Directors and volunteers here at the Strand, we welcome you here tonight for the third in our Strand lecture series, which is talking about our local government. For everybody on Facebook Live, welcome. You can't see in front of me, but it's a packed house tonight. We're very thrilled that we have a nice big crowd. And as always, if you want to make comments, please just put them in the comment section, and when it comes time to question and answer, we'll talk about that, and we'll get those in, as well as everybody here. We'll be passing a microphone around. Before we get started, I'd like to talk to you about a couple of things that are coming up. Tomorrow night is our Friday Night Frights. It's the 1965 Gothic Italian horror classic, Bloody Pit of Horror. That's going to be a lot of fun. Starts at 7:30. And as everybody knows, Olivia Newton-John passed away this week. It's very sad. And in honor of that, we're doing the movie Grease from 1978 on Saturday night, just one showing only. Thank you very much, Paramount Pictures, for allowing us to show that. And it'll be a lot of fun, and it'll start at 7:30. Just buy your tickets at the door. For both the movies, the balcony will be opened, and it's always a great place to sit. Then coming up next week on Saturday night, we have a huge extravaganza called Love and Rock, Women in Music. This is a full stage show, and it's a national touring company. It is really going to be something else. We are thrilled to have it. We really need you to go out and purchase tickets and come experience that wonderful thing. As Cody Veerkamp gets ready here with our projection, you'll notice not only the local audience but also online audience, we have our movie screen down, and that's because we're talking about taxes, and taxes are inherently figures, and those are itty-bitty small, and we want to make sure you're able to read them, so we talked to Tamara and we decided to drop our movie screen, and hopefully as soon as Cody gets it ready, we'll have a program on there. Cody, anytime soon? But there we go. We're getting there. Yeah, there we go. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So anyway, we are very thrilled. The last lecture series will be Brian Asher. He is Executive Director of Shelby County Development Corporation, and he's going to be talking about how companies come to Shelbyville and what it takes, and how it's not just, they magically appear. Sometimes it takes a decade's worth of work in order to get these, and I think he's going to be bringing a site selector as well. So that'll be very interesting. The 2023 lecture series is entitled How to Be a Citizen. We're going to be talking about that in more detail in the weeks and months ahead. But for now, it looks like we have something on our screen, so I would like to turn it over to our lecturer tonight from Purdue University, and she's an agricultural economist with degrees in agricultural economy, and she's going to talk to us about taxation issues, and we're really thrilled she's here. Please welcome Tamara Ogle from Purdue University. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David, so much for having me. I have to say this is probably quite a few firsts for me, so I'm not sure that I've ever presented from a movie stage. I'm not sure I've ever had my numbers on a movie screen, so I told David, I was like, I can get up and personal with the numbers here. They're so big. And I think I saw a dog in the audience earlier, which is also a first for me. So it's an exciting night, I guess, to be in Shelby County. Thank you so much for having me. I want to talk a little bit about local government revenues, but there's so much to our local government finance systems that I'm going to focus mostly on the property tax and a little bit on the local income taxes. I'll mention some of the other revenue sources as well, but that's going to be the bulk of what I talk about tonight. Now, up here is a table. This is the first table that we have in our reports that we do for each county, and I don't expect you to be able to read that. So I also can't read that, but I wanted to show you where some of the numbers come from, and then I'm going to blow up some of these numbers so that you can see them a little bit better. So up across the top, you'll notice on this left-hand side, we have all of the units in Shelby County. And so I don't know of another table like this. Oftentimes we see all of the taxing districts together, whether we get data from the Department of Local Government Finance or the SBA, and each of these units see their own budgets. But there's not really another place that I know that all of the units end up on one table like this. And so we have all of the units in the county. This is each of the local government units, including the 14 townships, 1 city, 4 towns, 5 school corporations, a library district, and 2 special districts. And then in the second column is the total appropriations. So this is everything that that local government unit budgets. And then when we go into the next 4 columns, those are the different fund types. And so we divide each fund into the general or education for schools, debt, cumulative or capital, so that's where we're saving for bigger projects that we're not going to take a debt bond out for, and then other operating. And at least for cities and counties, other operating usually contains a lot of our road funding. And so those total appropriations are divided into each of those fund types. And then if we go to the last section, those last 3 rows, this is the property tax section. So we've got the property tax levy that we'll talk about. That's the money that the local government intends to raise through the property tax. Next up is net assessed value, and then the property tax rate. So let's take a look at this top chart. And I think, we're going to sum all of the local government units in the county. And so in some ways, this is not really meaningful, right? None of you pay taxes to every local government in Shelby County, at least not on one parcel of land. So there's 5 school corporations for a specific parcel of land. It's only served by 1 school corporation. But by summing all of the local government units, it does give us an idea of what's going on in terms of local governments in a county. And it also helps us to compare across counties as well. So in Shelby County, local governments budget about $148.5 million. And you can see kind of how that's divided out into the different fund types. Now, notice I said that they budget that, but that's not necessarily what's all raised by property taxes. That's the property tax levy. And so the property tax levy for all of the local government units in Shelby County is $50.6 million, and this is for 2022, so taxes paid this year, budgets that were created this time last year by our local government units. You can see the net assessed value and then the property tax and that rate as well. That's not a specific property tax rate that anyone pays, but the average property tax rate for Shelby County. I bring up total appropriations again here because notice the difference between total appropriations and the property tax levy. We're going to talk about this on the next slide, but in Shelby County, about 34% of local government budgets are funded by the property tax, and that's pretty typical for counties in Indiana. So I mentioned we'll talk about that in the next slide, and these next couple of slides, I've got some formulas to share, and if you get nothing out of this, know these formulas. So if you work in local government or an elected official, or you're just a taxpayer, I think that these few formulas are very simple and really help to explain how property taxes work in Indiana. So I mentioned appropriations, this total appropriations, that's everything that the local government budgets. And so once the local government has their budget set, they're going to subtract all of the miscellaneous revenue. A lot of that might be local income tax. For schools, that's going to be state aid. That would also include road funding or other local taxes we have, like the innkeeper's tax. And then what's left over after we subtract all that miscellaneous revenue is what we need to raise, or what that local government needs to raise through the property tax. Now, this is subject, so that property tax levy is subject to state maximum levy limits. We call that the MLGQ, or maximum levy growth quotient. And so that limits how much local governments can grow their property tax levy each year. You might be wondering how, or how is that limited? How does that number come up with? And it's set for the entire state, and it's based on a 6-year average of non-farm, of growth rates of non-farm personal income. And so the idea is that our local government levies, those property tax levies, are growing with non-farm personal income in the state. You'll notice on this chart, the number that really sticks out is 2009, so that's when we had a negative growth or a loss in non-farm personal income. And when that came into the formula, so the red line is the growth quotient, or the percentage by which local governments can raise their levy for that year. And so when 2009 came into the formula, we saw a long period in this dip on the red line where growth rates were in the high 2%. As we dropped that in the 2013 year, which was also low, and we've had some better increases in non-farm personal income in recent years, we've seen this MLGQ, or the maximum levy growth quotient, go up. And so last year, when local governments were setting 2022 budgets, they could grow those levies by 4.3%. For this year, and that budgeting process is starting right now, we dropped 2023 and added 2021, which is the largest number that we have on this graph. So growth at I think it was over, I can't remember if it was 8.5 or just over 8%. And so when that got added into that 6-year average, that means that local governments this year, as they're setting budgets right now, can increase that levy by 5%. And so that we kind of see that, one, because of stimulus, we're seeing higher wages, and that's all driving that rate up. If you look to, so we dropped 2015 for this budget year. If you want to know what's happening with the growth quotient in the next few years, you might look at 2016 and 2017. These numbers are both lower than everything that are in front of them, and so really the question is, what happens with non-farm personal income this year and next year? Will they be higher than the numbers we see in 2016 and 2017 that will be dropped, or will they be lower? And that gives us a sense of what direction that MLGQ will move. So we had total appropriations, we subtracted miscellaneous revenue, and we were left with that levy, that dollar figure that the local government intends to collect with the property tax. You know, the property tax rate is very different than a lot of the other taxes that we deal with. Usually we set a rate, and whatever income that you get from that rate multiplied by the base is what you have. And so when we think about the sales tax is 7%. We all know that. We all know what the income tax is for Indiana, or what bracket you're in for the federal income tax. But the property tax is different than that. It's the opposite. And so the local governments set how much they want to bring in, and then they divide that by what's actually taxed, which is net assessed value. And that gives them their tax rate. And so that changes, that tax rate can be different for every unit in Indiana, and it can also be different every single year because our levy is going to change and our net assessed value is going to change. And so that makes it maybe property taxes in some ways a little bit more mysterious for people on the outside of government, because it isn't a set rate. It isn't that 7% sales tax. It's something that changes frequently based on this formula. So I mentioned, and I didn't mean to flip to that slide quite yet, so we summed up all of the local government units in Shelby County a little while ago on that first table. And I mentioned comparing it to other counties. And I think that that's really important to get a sense of what's going on with local governments and taxes in your own county, and to look and see what's happening in your region or in counties that have a similar population. But in order to do that, we need to divide it by the population. That way we can compare across different counties with per capita numbers. And so that's what I've done here. Is we've just taken that total appropriations for Shelby County, the property tax levy, the net assessed value, and divided those by the population so that we can compare Shelby County to other counties in this region. And so as I look at this, You might notice I like to start on the tax rate side. So let's start with the sum of the equation, our tax rate, and work backwards and try to figure out why our tax rate is what it is. And so the average property tax rate in Shelby County is about $2.07 per $100 assessed value. That's how we talk about property taxes in Indiana. And if you look at our neighbors, I've got Hancock, Johnson, Rush, and Bartholomew County here. Shelby County has the lowest tax rate out of any of its neighbors. So I wonder why. So the next thing I want to look at is my denominator to that equation, that net assessed value. What's the net assessed value per capita in Shelby, and how does it compare to its neighbors? And I notice it's right in the middle of the range. So it's higher than Hancock and Johnson, but lower than Rush and Bartholomew. It's higher than the Indiana average, too. And so that might explain some of my low tax rate, but I'm also curious, how much are we trying to raise per person in taxes in Shelby County compared to the neighbors? And so for that, I'm looking at the property tax levy of $1,125 per person. That's how many property tax dollars are raised per capita in Shelby County by Shelby County governments. And as I look down, it looks like we're the lowest. And so that helps to explain what that low tax rate is. That low tax rate in Shelby County is driven very much by a lower property tax levy and a middle to high assessed value. I love looking at these charts. I always find something else to look at. So, and before I flip over to this next side, I'm also look at this population and I think Shelby County is kind of in a weird position, right? So it is a donut county, but barely, right? You have a little border with Marion County, and it's significantly smaller than most of its neighbors. So Hancock and Bartholomew are about twice the size. Johnson is really big and growing really fast. And then you've got Rush County that is a lot smaller. And so maybe we'd like to compare to some counties that have a similar population. So I brought up 4 counties here that have the closest population to Shelby County: Du Bois, Lawrence, Jackson, and Marshall. And now as I'm looking at that average property tax rate, I notice that there's a little bit more diversity in our tax rate in the comparable population set. And so Marshall has a really low tax rate. And then we would be second, right? Second lowest. So I'm curious, when I look at Shelby County compared to Marshall, what's going on? They're actually raising about the same per person in the property tax levy, but that lower tax rate in Marshall County is driven by a really high per capita net assessed value. Net assessed value per capita. So you can see $60,943 per person of net assessed value in Marshall compared to the $54,000 in Shelby County. And so that depresses the rate more in Marshall County. It's hard to teach this program to a theater, so I'll let you in on a secret. Usually we hand you all these tables and we just ask you to find the answers. So I talk for a little bit and then I say, okay, you look at your data and tell me what's going on, because I see Shelby County from a 30,000 foot view. I can look at all those numbers, but you know all the intricacies of what's going on because you live here, right? And so it's always strange to be called in as an expert because I think the experts are in the room. So you may want to compare, maybe you don't like looking at similar populations or the neighbors, and maybe you want to look at the percentiles. And so the percentiles show a very similar story. So the tax rate in Shelby County is below the median. No surprise there from the other counties that we've looked at. And the net assessed value is above the median. Again, no surprise there from some of the other counties that we've looked at. Similar things with the property tax levy and even total appropriations are a little above the median, or actually close to the 75th percentile, but that net assessed value being above the median really helps. So we've talked about, and I keep skipping my slides, I shouldn't do that. I get too excited. But we've talked about this idea of the levy divided by net assessed value equals the tax rate, which I don't know if you've heard it, but I've heard a lot. That means net assessed value is king, right? So when we have a growth in a net assessed value, it's going to drive our tax rate down, and people like lower tax rates, right? And so let's take a look at net assessed value. And so you may not be able to read the key here, but basically red is lower or bad and green is good. And so I can start to tell some stories. I love looking at maps of Indiana when it comes to local government numbers, because you see these regions pop out and you can start to tell stories about what's going on. And you'll notice Shelby County, if you kind of divide the metro area, you'll notice that Shelby is on that southeastern side. And so they're all kind of in that yellow group with this median net average assessed value, or average net assessed value, or maybe a little bit above the median. You'll also notice that Boone and Hamilton and Hendricks, although the color's a little wonky on the screen, have a really high assessed value. And that's not surprising when we think about some of the growth that has happened in those counties and the type of growth that's happened in those counties, whether it be Amazon and warehouses and so forth, or higher end homes and some of the things that support those in Hamilton County. But there's other regions in the state that pop out too. The first one that pops out to me is that big red arc from Cass County to Fayette. Any ideas what that might be? That's that old, I like to call it the automotive arc, but it's manufacturing, right? And so assessed value has kind of been lost in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and a lot of that area is still recovering from that drop in assessed value, because you can't eliminate government services just because assessed value drops. Another region that pops out to me, and the color is a little off on it, but it's this purplish lavender color, which should be pink, and so it's a lower assessed value as well, and it's bordered by red down in the southern part of the state. So I'm thinking of Davies, Martin, Orange, Washington, Clark, and then down into Crawford and Perry. What's going on there? Why would they have a low assessed value per capita? Well, I can tell you that they don't have a lot of land that they tax. Some of those counties don't. So a lot of that is Hoosier National Forest, or it's private-owned forest land that is assessed at a discounted rate. And then the other one that sticks out to me is this green section in the northwest part of the state. So Jasper, Pulaski, White, Benton, and Warren are all that dark green with $70,000 or more per net assessed value. What's going on there? And there's a few different things. One of them is wind turbines. Another is ag land, and especially good ag land with very few people. And so when we think about that per capita net assessed value, you don't have a lot of population, and Benton County's right there, I think at around 8,000 people, and you divide all of that farmland, that fixed land, by a small population, you're going to have a high per capita assessed value. So what do you think in Shelby? What do you think is your largest property type in Shelby? Is it homesteads? Is it personal property, business, commercial, agriculture? I'm guessing you know a few things and could probably tell me what it is without even looking at the chart. But here's the gross assessed value by property type in Shelby County. And so these figures are in the millions. The majority of it is in households, so 49%, or that's our biggest chunk, is homesteads. And this is gross assessed value, so keep that in mind. And then we've got personal property and business real and agriculture. That might not mean a lot, though, without looking at the state. So let me flip over to the state for a second. So this is the average across Indiana. Or not the average, this is just the gross assessed value across Indiana by property type. And so you'll notice that Shelby County is actually less reliant on homesteads. That was a little surprising to me. Being a donut county, I would think that you would still have a lot of commuters and a lot of homesteads. I also thought it was curious that if we flip back to Shelby County, they have a lot of personal property. And so I'm a little curious. I'm anxious to hear afterwards what that might be. In fact, the personal property was a larger percentage of the gross assessed value than the business real, which is kind of unusual. And then the last property type I want to highlight is agriculture. And so I can tell whether I driven down here or not that this is still very much an agricultural community as well, with a higher percentage than the total state of that gross assessed value being in agriculture. So we've talked about the levy, we've talked about assessed value. Let's move on to that property tax rate. And if you remember, I mentioned in that first table that we're looking at units. Each local government unit goes through this budgeting process and sets their levy, which is divided by their assessed value for their area, and that equals the rate. These are the percentile rates for counties, so not counties summed together, but the actual county government, cities and towns, and schools. And so I've included a few things here from Shelby County. So if we look at the Shelby County rate, and we know our overall tax rate is below the median. So I'm not surprised when I look at the Shelby County government rate, and it's also below the median. In fact, it's just above the 25th percentile for county rates. Then I look at cities and towns, and boy, cities and towns are hard to compare. I only stuck 2 of the cities and towns up here, Shelbyville and Morristown. And I'm guessing, and I don't know a lot about Morristown, but I'm guessing that there's a dramatic difference in the services that Morristown versus Shelbyville provides. And so that's one of those things where it's a little bit harder to compare cities and towns because, you know, in my community, I have the little town of Rossville, and then we have Lafayette and West Lafayette. So those are very, very different communities. But Shelbyville has right under that 75th percentile, which doesn't surprise me from a county seat in the main area or main city of a county. And then Morristown is just above the 25th percentile. Next, I want to look at schools, because schools can be a little bit more interesting and definitely easier to compare. And so I noticed that you have, and I left out Decatur because it's actually, its primary county is Decatur County. But here's the 4 whose primary county is Shelby County. So we have Shelby Eastern and Shelbyville that have very similar rates at $1.06. That's just a little bit above the median. And then we have Northwestern and Southwestern, which I'm guessing are in more rural areas and maybe cover more geographic territory. And they have a lower tax rate, closer to the median, and even for Southwestern, almost to the 10 percentile. Okay, so we've been talking about unit rates up until this point, but at some point in time, you've got to get to that total tax rate that you actually pay as the taxpayer, right? So we've got to add these rates up in a way add these rates up to the local governments that serve you. At one point in time, each local government billed their own taxes, or at least I think that's what happened. My mom's a local historian for Washington Township in Hendricks County, and she shared with me one time a tax bill for Washington Township that somebody had donated to the library, and on the tax bill it said that the man had paid his township taxes by grading the gravel on the township roads. And so at one point in time, these different services provided by local governments were handled in a little bit different way. But today you get one tax bill, unlike maybe the hospital where you go and have surgery and you get a bill from the doctor and from the anesthesiologist and maybe from the parking attendant. But in Indiana, you get one tax bill from the county, and that adds all of the tax rates up for the different local government units that you live in their area. And so here's an example of that. So here I've got a county that's a little bit simpler than Shelby County, so only 4 townships compared to our 14. And then let's add a city. So that circle is a city, and we'll split it. The city's going to lie in Township 1 and a little bit in Township 4. And then next, I'm going to add in a school corporation or 2 school corporations. And just to be a little bit evil, we're going to split the school corporations through the town. And so I've got School Corporation West and School Corporation East. And so you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different local government units. But when I start adding up my different districts, so all of those combinations of those units, I end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. 10 is that little tiny corner of the town that's also in School Corporation East and Township 4, so maybe just a few houses. And so you can understand how this kind of gets complicated really fast, but it's important because when you get your tax bill, we need to be able to add these up to a total district rate. And so let's take taxing district 3 as an example. Let's say the county rate, so if you remember, taxing district 3 is this little sliver that is in School Corporation East, but Township 1. And in the town, and so let's say the county is 50 cents, and then the township has a tax rate of 10 cents, and then the town has a tax rate of $1, and so does School Corporation East. And so we add all of those unit tax rates up and get a district tax rate for District 3 of $2.60 per $100 assessed value. Now, I don't have a picture of your taxing districts in Shelby County. It would be really cool if we had those for every county. I did pull this off of your GIS, and I think this is school districts, although I feel like some of these blue lines I'm not counting and getting the 5 school districts that I should get, but maybe being from the local area, you can pick that out a little bit better. And if I look at my screen and squint really hard, I think I can see a little bit thicker gray lines of townships. And so you may be familiar enough with your county and the roads that are on here to say, oh yeah, I live here, and these are the local governments that serve the area that I live in. Here's what that chart looks like. And so on the left-hand side is the taxing district, and since we're on the movie screen, you can actually read that. That's crazy. But we've got the taxing district on the left side. If it's in a city or town, that's listed. The school corporation that serves it, and then the library district. And in Shelby County, you have a consolidated library district, so it's all the same one. I left all other off of this, so usually we combine townships and any of those special districts into all other. For Shelby County, because their special districts cover the entire county, it would really only be your township that's different among those. So if you know your taxing district, you can look up where you are in the percentiles. And it's really important that when we're comparing percentiles of district tax rates, that we think about cities and towns versus rural rates. And that's because cities and towns are an added layer of government, right? And so we would expect them to have a higher tax rate. It's where, a group of people have come together at some point in time and said, we're going to live in close quarters to each other, and because of that, we probably need some extra services, right? Enhanced fire protection maybe, and because we're not going to have large yards, we might need a park. We might need water and sewer because we can't depend on wells and septic on smaller lots. And so I like to compare my city and town rates to the city and town percentiles, and then my rural rates or unincorporated rates to those rural percentiles. In Shelby County, when I look at the city and town rate, it ranges from $1.9386, so that's an incorporated area district, and that's just above the 10th percentile, all the way to $3.57. Any ideas what that district is? That's Edinburgh, and so there's just the smallest sliver, it seems, of Edinburgh in Shelby County, and Edinburgh has a really high tax rate. And so if we were to take Edinburgh out of this mix, all of Shelbyville's tax rates would be the next highest, and they're all just under $3. And so if we back up here, you might actually be able to see that. So 289, where's another one? 288. So right there around $2.90. And so you can see that's quite a bit lower. That lowers us down below the 75th percentile. Now, if we look at our unincorporated rates in Shelby County, they range from $1.25 to $1.64. And look at that $1.25. That rate is one of the lowest 9 rates in the state. So it's below the 10th percentile. We know we've got 92 counties, so there's approximately 9 counties below that 10th percentile. And so Shelby County has at least one of those districts. I guess that's not true because there's 2,000 some districts, but it's below the 10th percentile, so it is a low rate. Now, I'll flip back just one more time since the people at least here can read this, and maybe you can find your taxing district. If there were more people here, I'd call out a taxing district and see if I could hit somebody, like hit where somebody lives, but I'm worried that I could spend quite a bit of time doing that, so I won't. But I'll give you a moment to look and see if you can find your taxing district. Okay, hopefully you remembered that taxing district rate. Now, is it a city or town, or is it a rural area? Where do you land on the percentiles? Did anybody find theirs? Are you below the 10th percentile? Raise your hand. Are you between the 10th and 25th percentile? No. How about between the 25th and the 50th? I've got all Shelbyville rates. Is that everybody lives in Shelbyville? How about 50th to 75th percentile? Okay, very good. 75th to 90th? Okay. Yeah, so we know from that average tax rate in Shelby County, that $2.06 that we looked at early on, that most of Shelbyville's rates are going to be below the 75th percentile or lower. And definitely, if it's not Shelbyville, it's more likely to be below the median. Okay, so this is where we would stop. It would all be over. We could all go home if we didn't have property tax caps, because this rate multiplied by your net assessed value is what you would pay to the local governments. That would get distributed based on the tax rate of each local government unit. And then once they added all of those payments together, they would get that levy that they intended to raise through the property tax. But you might have noticed that throughout the last half hour, I keep saying the levy is what those local governments intend to collect, because that's not always what they collect. And so in 2010, we voted the property tax caps into the Indiana Constitution. And I remember that day very clearly, because the next day I got up and I had my first son. And so I remember being very pregnant and going to my precinct that day, or that day to vote. So the tax caps limit our tax bills to a percentage of gross assessed value. And so if your home is worth $100,000, it would be limited to 1% of that gross assessed value. Other residential and farmlands limited to 2%, and business, real, personal, all other is limited to 3%. Taxes passed by referendum are exempt from caps, and Lake and St. Joe counties got 10 years to adjust because they had so much debt, but those 10 years are over, so that doesn't matter anymore. So let's take a look at the property tax caps in Shelby. we know that because Shelby County has quite a few low rates, that there's not going to be a ton of property tax caps, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be any. And so, not for homesteads, but until we see rates raise above 2% or 3%, those 2% and 3% categories, the caps won't hit. And so we don't have really very many of just Edinburgh in terms of tax rates that are above $3. And so as we can see here, there's very few property tax caps in that 3% category. And I'm sorry, that's so light on the screen. But the 2% category is where most of the caps occur. So this is likely other residential in incorporated areas where there's a higher tax rate, or it could be some farmland that's also in incorporated areas. Usually there's not that much farmland in incorporated areas. And then there are a few homestead tax caps as well. Now, I'm never sure, do I call these tax cap credits or do I call them tax cap losses? Because it depends on the audience. For those of you that are paying taxes, which hopefully is most of us in this room, or you're paying them through the rent that you pay, those are credits. When I see those on my bill, I'm glad that I don't have to pay that portion of my bill. For local governments, that's also money that they budgeted to provide local services that they intended to collect, and now they don't have, and they've got to figure out how to deal with that. Those are losses for local governments. And so I just bring that up because there's two sides to every coin when it comes to these things. While tax caps save taxpayers money, they also maybe sometimes prevent local governments from fully providing services that they intended to. You can see when you look at the 2020 to 2021 caps, and this data is a year older because that's what LSA has out right now for tax caps, there was a pretty good increase. And so what happened there? We had maybe a few towns or incorporated districts that were right at that $2 mark that we saw for the 2022 budget. Their tax rate was, and so maybe they passed over that and triggered some property tax caps or more property tax caps from 2020 to 2021 in that 2% category. Or maybe it was some of our more expensive homesteads that might have triggered that cap. Those caps are distributed in the district that they are given. So those when the credits are given to a taxpayer, that district, all of those overlapping units then also share in that loss, or those tax cap losses are distributed across those units based on their tax rate. And so you can see most of the losses here occur in Edinburgh, 41% of their levy that's in Shelby County. And so this is not Edinburgh Town's complete levy here, but just the portion of tax cap credits and levy in Shelby County. And then Shelbyville's losing about 11% of their levy. Shelbyville Schools, 9%. Addison Township, is that Edinburgh or is that Shelbyville? Shelbyville. Okay. So a lot of times we can tell that, you know, Addison Township probably does not have a really big tax rate, but because they are overlapping with Shelbyville, that the total district rate is higher and triggers those tax cap losses. And then we do have quite a few units here from the county, the special districts, and the library that cover the entire county. So all of those are losing about 4.9%. Everybody else loses less than that. So I gave you the units that are losing the most from property tax caps. So you'll notice in the county, that's 6.8% of the total levy of the county, all of the local government units in Shelby County. That's not very high for Indiana counties. And so in Lake County, in Delaware County, in some of these counties that have very high tax rates, Lake County, I noticed, has a tax rate this year of over $8 in one of their districts. Those tax caps are exorbitant, right? And so this 6.8% is not a lot, but that is money that was budgeted for local government services. And now those local governments have to figure out how to either provide those services for less or to cut certain services because of this loss of revenue. Now, this is not true in Shelby County, but I do want to talk about two kind of crazy things that happen with the property tax caps and our maximum levy growth quotient. A lot of times people get those two confused. So the maximum levy growth quotient constrains how much local governments can increase their levy, what they want to raise by from the property tax. The property tax caps cap our bills as taxpayers, but they interact with each other. And so you can imagine the amount of taxes that you can raise to be a fixed pie, right? And so this is, because of tax caps, we have now fixed the pie of what local government units would be able to raise. Anything above that, we get the rate too high, like that $8 rate in Lake County, and all of that extra that we try to raise is going to go to tax cap credits. Because of that, if somebody, so let's say, I know that we've got somebody with the schools, let's say the schools want to be fiscally responsible and decrease their budget. So everybody's at their tax caps, we have a really high rate, and the schools say, you know, we don't need this much money, we're going to decrease our budget. Well, what ends up happening is that school slice gets smaller because their rate as a part of the total rate is smaller, but we still are losing to tax cap credits, and so everyone else's slice gets bigger. So essentially, the school, by being fiscally responsible, just gave money to the other overlapping units. And this creates a lot of problems in counties that have these really high rates and generally have really depressed net assessed values to get those rates. It's not just because of spending, because it's really, or it incentivizes local governments to tax to that maximum levy, right? They always want to tax as much as they possibly can so that they can keep their slice of the pie. Another crazy thing that happens, or maybe not crazy, but interesting thing that happens with tax caps is the fact that they are on gross assessed value. So, and we give a lot of deductions to homesteads. That's the difference between gross assessed value and net assessed value. So, gross assessed value is that top line when you get your tax bill of what your house is worth, and then they take off the homestead deduction, which is $45,000, and then they take off another 35% of the remainder, and maybe a $3,000 for a mortgage deduction, although that is changing this year, but for right now, this is true. And changing a little bit, nobody get concerned. And what ends up happening is you end up with this net assessed value that's far lower than your gross assessed value. That net assessed value is what they multiply by the tax rate to get your tax bill. But the gross assessed value is what triggers the tax cap. So 1% of that gross assessed value. So I think that this chart can be really handy, and what that tells us is when rates are above $2 or above 2%, we trigger tax caps in that 2% category. When rates are above $3 or 3%, we trigger tax caps in that 3% category. For homesteads, it's a little different. So for a $100,000 home, gross assessed value, we would have to have a rate of around $3 to start triggering tax caps on that home. And as homes get more expensive, that rate drops. So a $200,000 home would start to trigger tax caps around that $2 tax rate. So I think it's helpful to keep those two arrows in mind. A $100,000 home triggers tax caps at that $3 tax rate, and $200,000 home at the $2 tax rate. Next up, homestead bills, and I'm getting down to the last few slides here, but I wanted to show you this. If you haven't seen this, so LSA, Legislative Service Agency, used to put out a county report every year on assessed value and taxes, and it was a great publication. So there was one for every county and then kind of a statewide summary. Well, they've moved to this data visualization that's on the IGA website, and I have it at the end of my presentation, and it's really cool. And so if it's something that you enjoy, I would encourage you to play with it. And in the past, they haven't had a lot on homestead bills, but they do now. And so I really thought that this was a nice thing to look at. And so basically, this is showing the tax bills that were higher. So that first third is the 3 bars are tax bills that were higher for Shelby County from 2020 to 21. And then the middle is no change, and then these lower 3 bars are the number of households, and these are just homesteads. The number of homesteads that had lower tax bills. And then it even shows you how much they increased by. And so if you look at the average homestead bill change in Shelby County from 2020 to 2021, it went up 9.8%. So why was that? We see assessed values going up right now. If you received your Form 13, you probably looked at it and thought, oh my gosh, my house has gone up or my land has gone up. And so some of that is that the MLGQ let us increase levies by about 4 something percent last year. Some of it might be changes, or that assessed value didn't quite catch up with that, right? And so this year we might see tax rates that are, well, actually in 2022, we might have seen tax rates that are a little bit lower because we did see an increase in assessed value or overall assessed value across the state. Okay, so in Shelby County, this next part doesn't matter, but it might someday. So if you noticed when I read about the tax caps in the Indiana Constitution, there was a caveat in there that taxes passed by referendum are exempt from caps. And the reason is because when you go into the voting booth and you see that there is a referendum to pay for a new school building or maybe for a new jail, you think, hey, my kid might go to that school, my kid might go to that jail. I'd like it to be a nice facility. And so, and then you think, wait a minute, I'm at my tax cap, so it can't increase my taxes, so I'm going to vote yes. And so that doesn't work out very well. And so the legislature recognized that and put this caveat into the amendment that we voted into the Constitution, saying that if taxes are passed by referendum, if you vote to have more taxes, or the majority in your area vote to have more taxes, then those are exempt from caps. Most of these are school referenda. Occasionally we do have a jail referendum. But here, this shows the percentage of school referenda that passed from 2008 to 2021. We didn't have that many from 2020 to 2021, and I'm guessing that's because we had a lot of stimulus money that was flowing to schools, and it probably would not have been a great time to run a referendum anyway. This shows the pass and defeat rate, and you know, we've done some research on this, and it's really hard to tell what passes and what doesn't. We know that early on, from 2008 to 2011, it was much harder to pass a referendum. And as we got more used to it, we got better at messaging and understanding what that was, or local governments got better at sharing with constituents what that was. It became easier to pass. It also looks like it's easier to pass a referendum in a May election or a primary election versus the general election. So just in case you're thinking about it, and you know, you did just have one in May in Edinburgh schools, although that doesn't cover Shelby County. And I think I can understand why, from seeing their town rate, that they might have needed a school referendum. Here's what this would look like. So these are a couple from Johnson County from 2021, and they still have the levy and the net assessed value, which they divide to get the tax rate. It can't exceed a certain amount. But what they do is that tax rate would just be applied after the property tax cap. And so that tax rate would not be part of your tax bill that's used to calculate the tax, or to check and see whether you're over your cap. So that would be applied above and beyond. I see it's 7:55, so David, would you like me to get into local income taxes, or would you like me to take some questions? Okay, you're not throwing rotten tomatoes at me, or zucchini. This time of year it might be extra zucchini. So I don't have a lot on the local income tax, and I will send this to David so he can send it out because I love this chart. A few years ago, actually it's more than a few years ago now, the Indiana legislature decided to simplify the local income tax. We had somewhere between 9 and 13 local income taxes, and nobody could decide how to count them, whether it was 9, whether it was 11, whether it was 13, and they were complicated, and so they said, let's simplify this whole process. We're going to have 3 taxes. That's going to be one for property tax relief, and so anything that comes in on the property tax relief local income tax then gets applied as credits on property tax bills. One for expenditures and one for special purposes. Special purposes are set by the legislature. Expenditures could go into 3 different buckets. And so before there were caps within each of these buckets, and it was complicated, and now they said, just your expenditure rate cannot exceed 2.5%, but you can use it for public safety, and if it's public safety, then it goes to the counties, the cities, and towns, and if you decide, you can send it to the townships, who cover a lot of our public safety through unincorporated fire. It can go towards economic development. It can go towards certified shares. So certified shares goes to any civil taxing district unit except schools. Sorry, schools. And that can be used revenue for general fund purposes. And then, of course, that lasted a year or two with it simplified, and we added in county jails. And so county jails is the 4th bucket there. Simple things can't stay simple for long. And so now a county can choose to enact an expenditure rate up to 0.2%, and that goes directly to the county for county correctional rehabilitation facilities, and is distributed before the remainder of those expenditure categories. So what do you have in Shelby County? Well, here, let's take a look at it. So we've got the total over to the left, but I'll start with certified shares. It looks like you have certified 0.26% rate for certified shares, so that can be used for general revenue purposes by everybody but the schools, so that's distributed to everybody but the schools. You've got 0.5% rate for economic development, and then you've got a 0.0389% rate for property tax relief. So the $205,000 that raises goes back to credits on property tax bills, and that can be distributed in a few different ways. So you'll notice that very bottom line, that's where I got that $205,000 number. That's what this raised, what the local income tax raised in 2021, or actually the allocation in 2021. So if we add all those rates up, people pay an income tax, who live in Shelby County, pay an income tax of 0.8%. And so when we look at that compared to the rest of the state, that's below the 10th percentile, so a pretty low income tax state. I did notice we used to have a few counties that were over that 3% rate, which is pretty high for a local income tax, and I did notice that they are all down under 3% now. So you see that maximum in local income tax, total income tax, local income tax is 2.9%. So that's Wabash and Jasper, and I'm trying to think about who are some of the few higher taxing counties. I know at one point in time, Montgomery County had a pretty high property tax relief rate, and so when you saw the credit on their property tax bills, it was crazy how high it was, and you're like, what's going on that everybody's property tax bills are so low? Well, they were funding a portion of what they intended to fund with the property tax with actually the local income tax for property tax relief. Here's see, I should have just flipped to the next slide, and I could have listed off a few more counties that were up on the higher end of the local income tax. So I noticed that something's wrong here. I must be missing one of your tax rates. So I will take a look at that. Am I missing a tax rate, or is this total tax rate wrong on the category, wrong on the map? Do you guys know? Do you know what your total local income tax rate is? Okay, I'll have to check the data because something is off there when I look at the key. So hold off on that one. I'll send David some slides with that updated. But I think it's important to think about the mix that we use to fund local government revenue, right? So we've got user fees, we've got local income taxes, we have a few other local taxes that we can use. We've got grants that we can go after, and of course the property tax. A lot of those are really small drops in the bucket compared to the property tax and the local income tax. And you can kind of see from this map the counties that rely more heavily on that local income tax versus that property tax. What does that mean for that county, right? The local income tax is much more variable. Income is much more variable. The property tax tends to be more stable, but it's also regressive. And so we can start to think about what kind of mix of taxes is appropriate for our county. The last thing I'll point out is some sources, and so if you like looking at data, here's some great places to look. A lot of this information came from LSA's handbooks and their property tax studies. I also put together a property tax model every year that I'm not quite done with, but the newer data came from that model. I still have to update my homestead bills and my property tax caps, so we used older data for that section. All of that data for my model comes from the Department of Local Government Finance, LSA, and the SBA. Gateway, if you've not checked out Gateway, you can access a lot of reports for your county on Gateway or your unit on Gateway. And then we also have some studies, so if you want to look at TIF studies, if you want to get into tax increment financing or capacity costs, so the capacity of your local government to raise revenue versus the cost of services that we kind of estimate for your area. Those reports are on the Purdue Center for Regional Development, Rural Indiana Stats website. And then if you want to see some goofy videos and that property tax cap pie that we did eat in one of those videos, you can check out our Purdue Extension on local government site to learn more in some short 10-minute videos about how the property tax works. With that, I will take a few questions.
Well, thank you very much. I know the first question, I know Tom and I both have this, is in our local property taxes, there's a TIF replacement tax. Do you know what that's all about? Or local tax, you know.
The
TIF replacement tax. Not to put you on the spot.
Is it a district?
Yeah. What the pass-through is? Oh, that could be a good point.
I was looking, yeah, because sometimes though there will be memo districts for TIFs and for other things. Sometimes there's even memo units, which I try to delete out of the data because they mess things up. I was trying to look at that chart to see if I could see it. But that may be what it is. It's just a pass-through or a memo district for the auditor to use.
Okay. Well, we have some people here. Questions? Ned, front. Okay, hold on, Ned. Let me come up here and give you the microphone.
Once again, I just want to say you did a great job, and it was very educational. I'm very glad I came. I live in Liberty Township, and most of our townships, of our 14 townships in Shelby County, do not have an incorporated town, and we rely heavily on three governments. The township trustee, and the county commissioner, and the county, specifically the county commissioners, and also the school corporation is our big, three. I might have missed it, but where does the township trustees, I'm a big fan of township boards. We also have one in Liberty Township, Township Board. Does that come from the county, or is the township trustee his own, like the school corporation, his own taxing authority?
They are their own taxing
Thank
authority. You. Yeah, thank you for that question. They are their own taxing authority. So if I can get back to my first slide here. And, they get left out sometimes because they are so small in the overall grand scheme of things. Sorry, it's coming. So if we looked at this first set, and I realize you can't read anything on there, but that's a list of all of the local government units in Shelby County. The first one's the county, so this is how we kind of code them. The first one's a county, those are a 1, type 1, and then the township is the second one, that's type 2. And so you see the 14 townships end right and so if you could see this chart a little bit closer, you said Liberty Township. Let me back up one more. Okay, so it looks like Liberty Township has a total appropriations of $76,963, and they raise $30,647 of that through the property tax. I think that's a 6, not positive. The township has an assessed value of about $80 million and a tax rate of about 4 cents. So, and that's one of the reasons if I go forward to where we're adding up those units, and maybe I didn't explain that real well, but when we are adding up these units, everybody has a county, everybody has a township, everyone has a school corporation. So those are the yeah, and so those are the big 3. You're absolutely right. And then some people have a town, a lot of people have a library district, a lot of people have other special districts.
Cody, do we have any questions online? Nope. Anybody else have any questions?
Yes,
Yeah.
as soon as I figure out what happened with that income tax rate.
And also, when you look at this on our YouTube channel or through Facebook, the slides are crystal clear on that feed too. So anyway, I want to thank Tamara very much and Purdue University Extension Education Office for providing this tonight. I think we've done a lot of lectures here, but I think that's about as deep in the weeds as we've gotten in on any of them. So
it's really hard for me not to get deep in the weeds. I do have one other thing if you guys want to play a little game.
Sure.
Okay, this will be quick. So this is fact or myth property tax edition. The state collects too much money through property taxes. Stand up if you think this is a fact. Oh, you guys are so good. So this is a myth. You might think that your property taxes are too high, but none of it goes to the state. So it all goes to local governments. How about property taxes fund road maintenance and repair? Fact or myth? Stand up if you think it's a fact. I can't tell if you guys aren't playing or if you're not sure. This is both. Yeah. So for counties are not allowed to use the property tax for road repair. They can use it for bridges. Weird little caveat there. But cities and towns can use some of the property taxes for road maintenance and repair. Property tax caps protect taxpayers from property tax increases. Fact or myth? It's a myth. So right now, assessed values are going up. You're likely going to see your property taxes increase some too with that. So it might depress the rate enough that it doesn't, but property tax caps only protect you based on your assessed value. Statewide, there are about 2,000 different property tax rates. Fact or myth? Yep, that's true. So this year, I think there's 2,081 is the last cell on my Excel sheet. So like when we looked at that formula, levy divided by net assessed value equals a rate, that's different for every unit, and then you combine them into taxing districts and add up all these different layers, and it's different in every taxing district. So that was my fun little game.
Well, let's give a big round of applause to Tamara. Thank you very much. Everybody who's watching online, this will be available later. We want to thank you as well, and thank you for coming to the Strand.